So now we would like to start our session. Thank you so much for coming to our session. I also thank you for all audience who are connecting with our session by online. My name is Yumiko Asayama, Chief Manager of Japan Water Forum and also the coordinator of the Asia Pacific Water Forum. Asia Pacific Water Forum is organizing 5 Asia Pacific water focus sessions, and now is the 3rd one, focus on governance for climate change adaptation. And this session aims to showcase innovative solutions and best practice in managing water resources for climate change adaptation and to address the impact of climate change. And this session will explore the role of technology, community participation, and policy reform in achieving effective water governance to tackle climate change issues for disaster resilience and so on. By sharing these successful case studies from our presenters, this session aims to inspire and catalyze action toward building a sustainable, climate-resilient future for water resource benefiting current and future generations in Asia Pacific and also over the world. So from now, we kindly welcome and invite Deputy Minister of Infrastructure, Ministry of National Development Planning, the Republic of Indonesia, Elvan Maxim, for delivering his distinguished opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. I will represent Mr. Basuki, Minister of Public Works of Minister in Indonesia. Distinguished speaker, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is great, an honor for me to represent the government of Republic Indonesia as the host of 10th World Water Forum 2024 in Bali, Indonesia. Joining the Stockholm World Water Week 2023 Asia Pacific Focus Sessions. Please allow me to deliver speech in opening session on adapting to climate change, innovative approach to water governance. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, climate change has been recognized to result, among others, in a decrease in water availability, change in crop productivity, and loss of biodiversity. In water resources management, climate change has been associated with the increased risk of flood and drought and other water-related disasters. The challenges of climate change, adverse impact in the water sector, will continue to persist and pose an imminent threat to our livelihood. Therefore, strategic partnership between countries and related parties to strengthen collaborative in finding, formulating, and delivering actions for real-world solutions shall be continued and enhanced. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the world still faces a broad range of water issues related to health, sustainable development, climate change, resilience, and the environment, and borderless cooperation. Addressing these issues require cross-sectoral cooperation, and the way forward can only be found through discussion and problem solving based on scientific evidence and through interdisciplinary decision-making process that transcend national, regional, and cultural boundaries. These efforts will be exert far-reaching positive effect on food, energy, urban development, and many other areas. Help communities transform into quality-oriented society and contribute to achieving regional and world peace. Indonesia has been practicing sustainable development by increasing resiliency of river basins, and maintaining and restoring a healthy water cycle through many projects, such as developing water resource in the Citarum, West Java, Indonesia, Bengawan Solo, and Brantas River with subsequent integrated water resource management and implementing climate change impact reduction measures. In addition, Indonesia participated in every COP and formulated in the National Climate Change Action Plan since 2007, as well as National Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Action Plan in 2009. Indonesia, with other countries, developed a state greenhouse net zero carbon emission action plan by 2050, requiring them to determine greenhouse gas reduction targets and action plan in 5 priorities areas: agriculture, forests, and peatlands, energy and transportation, industry, and waste. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, there are a vast number of issues that governments and stakeholders around the world need to take on by employing all resources at their disposal. This includes improving access to safe water and sanitation, which will require a quadrupling of effort to achieving the planned goals, clarifying the nexus water, disaster, climate, and overcoming the energy and food crisis through water. As the Asia-Pacific countries are expected to play a leading role in the international community in the coming years, must be the one take initiative, while working closely with other countries to accelerate global effort to fundamentally address this complex water issue. Political leaders in water and other sectors should fulfill their responsibility by leading substantive discussion and demonstrating their commitment. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, significant progress and results continue to be made, although some countries still need much more effort and support to respond to the adverse impact of climate change. There is a need for more proactive and coordinating action which refer to the commitment. This afternoon, we are very proud to have prominent speakers from various institutions that will share a brief overview of such case of adapting climate change and highlight innovative approaches to the case that might be adopted for more effective governance in the future. I do hope that all of you could actively participate in the discussion and enrich our views, especially on the application of innovative adaptation technology in the water sector. The 10th World Water Forum 2024 will be held in less than a year, by 18 to 24 May 2024. The government of Indonesia is in full swing to make this event in Bali a historical moment. I, as coordinator of the forum with the World Water Council, will do my utmost to raise the profile of water and disaster in the next forum. As the important milestone toward May 2024, we will also conduct the second stakeholder consultation meeting in 12 to 13 October 2023 in Bali. This meeting aims to have the adapted exchange of detailed political, thematic, and regional issues, and to have in-depth discussion with process working group how to plan forum week with final deliverable, including follow-up and action after the forum. We look forward to your participation, and thank you. I wish you fruitful discussion during the Stockholm Water week 2023. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Deputy Minister Elvan Masrum for very, very warm opening remarks for us. And also thank you for introducing what Indonesia also doing for climate change and disaster risk reduction for people's livelihood and also shared economy. From now, we would like to move on to the presentation, and we will have 7 speakers, and 6 speakers is here from on-site, and 1 speaker will be online. Now, we would like to invite on-site speaker. So first speaker is Dr. Regina Sauter, Director, International Water Centre, Griffith University of Australia. So Regina, floor is for yours.
Thank you, Yumiko.
Yes.
Wonderful to be here with such an eminent group.
Sorry,
No. No, we do need some help.
yeah,
It's frozen.
yeah.
There's no...
Come.
There it is. There. Oh, stop. Yeah, got it. Yeah. Yeah, I can drive that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can do this bit. Thank you. Okay. Lovely to be here. Thank you. No? Okay, awesome.
Choose enable.
Oh. Let's go. Okay. Apologies, that's already a minute and a half gone. Okay. Wonderful to be here. My name's Regina Sauter. I'm from the International Water Centre in Australia, and I'm really pleased to be sharing some of the lessons we've learned through our research with quite a number of partners in the Pacific. We've been experimenting with a few different innovations to governance to improve rural community water management. I'm only going to focus on 2 of those today. You can visit our website if you're interested in some of the others. These 2 are focusing on expanding the enabling environment, which is quite small and under-resourced in the Pacific, by including non-water or wash actors in that network, and secondly, using social marketing to influence attitudes and mobilise action. A tiny bit of orienting you to where we're working. This is the view, if you look at the globe, with the Pacific Ocean in the middle of that view. You can just see Australia off to the left. Zooming in a little bit so that you can see a little more detail where we've been working in the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu and Fiji. In that context, the populations are, relative to other countries, fairly small. They're rurally dominated and dispersed across many, many islands, often quite difficult to reach. So what is the water supply situation? In terms of rural water service governance, the models adopted by most of the countries in the Pacific is community managed water systems and essentially locally managed water resource management. The types of water systems, there's a great mix of those. They usually involve multiple sources and they range from self-supply to community shared systems. They have the full range of climate hazards in the Pacific, and the prevalence of these is increasing in severity. If you missed it, there was an excellent online presentation at 7 a.m. this morning that went into much more detail about why water security is such a challenge in the Pacific Islands. I recommend that you look that up. Okay. Community water management, everyone here is probably familiar. This model has been around for decades. In the Pacific, what we know that the Water Committee, who has the responsibility for managing these water systems, have persistent challenges and consistently are not able to deliver a water service that's safe and sustainable and reaching everybody in communities. Some of their challenges include there are some technical challenges they face in terms of being able to manage risk and performance of the system. There's some governance challenges. They often face legitimacy and don't have agency in communities. They're not held to account and they don't necessarily have high motivation to take action. Not surprising given all of the other challenges. And the last point there is that managing these community water systems does require all of the community members to be taking certain actions. So collective action is an important part of this model. Committees can find it challenging to mobilise and sustain that collective action. We're talking about things like paying water fees, conducting minor maintenance, and generally supporting the water committee. So globally, what we've seen is a shift towards regular support for community water management models, or community water management plus. In the Pacific, we've seen a reliance on external organisations or project-based support to support those communities and to fix problems. This has really created a culture of dependency, and that's been limiting self-belief and motivation and action by water committees and communities. So any support for communities needs to be provided in ways that encourages the initiative and the self-sufficiency of those water committees. So we're talking about a model like this, where there are external actors providing regular support to communities. One of the innovations I'm going to talk about today is about influencing the collective action. The other is to look at broadening that plus enabling environment network, given how constrained that is at the moment. So firstly, social marketing and using behaviour change strategies to influence attitudes for action. So we know collective action for water is important, and in communities, community members agree it's an important thing to be done, but it's not prioritised amongst the many other tasks that they have to do. Most of the communication we see in the Pacific is targeted at the water committees rather than broader society in terms of water, and that communication with the water committees is education-based. It's instructional in terms of what they need to do. So we wanted to use social marketing, or explore whether social marketing could perhaps fill a gap or play a role here in influencing attitudes, using psychosocial determinants, particularly through sharing real stories of success between communities and messages that promote positive attitudes. Helpfully, this style of sharing information is also really well aligned with the local pedagogies for sharing information, which is story-based. So we developed a campaign and a set of resources. Here's some examples here. Waters is everyone's business. These comprise a range of video tools and oral storytelling that are shared between communities. They are used in the way they're implemented, could be as a part of water or wash programs. For example, governments are using these in both the Solomons and Fiji, experimenting with screening these and prompting a discussion in communities. There's also local sharing and sharing of videos and stories via social media. And we've been in discussions with Digicel and Telecom in Fiji and the Solomons around a text-based campaign to promote the importance and positive messages around water action. The second innovation is really looking at expanding the enabling environment beyond the water and the usual water and wash actors for greater reach by leveraging the existing social networks that exist. In the Pacific, there's really strong social cultural norms of reciprocity, self-help and obligation, and we see a lot of this value and practice flowing from urban to rural communities. A community, it's not located only in the village, it extends into the urban areas. And so we see what we call town cousins, and we see other associations such as village development committees, where some of the members live in town and some of them are in the villages. There are also many highly active other social networks that are connecting where wash actors are, or water actors in usually capital cities, to rural communities. So for example, in Fiji, there are quite a few social media-based networks that are based around villages or clusters of villages, and they have already been playing an active role in supporting water for their rural communities. For example, fundraising for particular water projects, or sending water, or providing financial assistance during disaster responses. In the Solomon Islands, the National Umbrella Church Network really recently participated in some training. They were keen to do something on water management for their priests and pastors of various regions, around how they can also promote and influence attitudes around water management and water being important. And we're just starting to look at whether food and agricultural networks might be another social network, and other informal networks existing in catchments. These kind of networks obviously are only suitable for certain kinds of information being shared, and they're particularly useful for the social marketing style of information that I was just sharing previously. So why do we care about expanding the enabling environment? Community Water Management Plus, it needs to work. It needs to work not only to improve water services in rural communities, but because it's an important step on the pathway to professionalising rural water supply in the Pacific Island countries. So achieving Community Water Management Plus in many of these Pacific Island countries, we really need to expand beyond the current governance structures, and using social marketing and social networks have the potential to really assist in expanding that governance network. The last point I wanted to make was that, and it's a key point, that the innovations we've looked at here, they were really built on the existing strengths of governance and social systems there. We didn't create new networks. We tapped into the networks that were there, and we're just using those. So the research and development part of this process was critical in identifying those strengths. Thank you very much. I've gone through that in rapid fire. I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the session. We've got plenty of information on our website. Thank you.
Thank you for Regina for kindly introducing the case of Pacific Island, and particularly Fiji and Solomon Island. It is very, very informative to know about the cases. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Abe, Regional Advisor, Southeast Asia of UN Habitat. So you will have 8 minutes for presentation. Thank you.
How to go to the next presentation?
Sorry, it's technical staff volunteer. I need help here for opening file.
Is this the presentation?
Yeah.
That one.
Yes.
Thank you, Yumiko-san. Some wise person once said that technology can be technology. So this is one example. I'm going to run very quickly through our experience of working in the Asia-Pacific region. Basically, what I want to talk about is our strong engagement with communities, blended with science and technology to improve the resilience of these climate-impacted communities. We all understand, we all know that access to water contributes in a big way for community resilience, and also it overall improves the livelihoods and other socioeconomic conditions of the communities. These are the areas and the countries in which we are implementing this type of model, where we are implementing climate change project, where we are conducting a number of sophisticated analysis, implementing a number of physical infrastructure interventions. But all this process is being done together with active community participation. So sort of delve into a typical country case study is that of Laopedia. We know that Laos is a landlocked country, and there was a sort of a general understanding that it's quite a safe country in terms of climate-related challenges. But over the years, we have seen that Laopedia has been battered by a number of climate-induced hazards. And the Ministry of Natural Resources Environment requested UN Habitat to conduct a national climate risk and vulnerability assessment And when we conducted the assessment, we were very surprised to find that about 50% of the settlements in Lao PDR, including urban and rural settlements, have been impacted by at least one climate-induced hazard in a typical year. So that essentially means about half of the country's population is being battered by climate-induced events. So coming back to the model, which we call as the climate action cycle for water governance, it is basically in line with the typical quality management systems model that we are all aware of, PDCA cycle. So it starts with the planning where we sort of try to identify the roles of different stakeholders. Then it goes into the vulnerability and the risk assessment part of it, where it is led by a number of course, very hydrometeorological data, a lot of number crunching, but what we also do is to involve the community in the entire discussion and sort of try to get their perception, whether they see that the temperatures are rising or whether they feel that the rainy season has sort of shortened and the intensity of rain has sort of increased. There's a lot of community knowledge and understanding which we try to also integrate into our studies. Then the next step is action planning, which of course involves a lot of community participation where we take the results from this climate risk and vulnerability assessment and we sit with the communities and we try to understand and prioritize a number of actions they want to undertake to increase the resilience of the communities. And then the next phase, of course, naturally leads to implementing one or two of the identified actions. So already the community has a menu of actions which they can further initiate on availability of further resources. And finally, of course, we all go through a very reflective phase to find out how we can better plan in the next cycle. So this is a typical submodel where a lot of it's to do with vertical integration, linking the national authority to the provincial authority, to the district and to the village and to the community members, to the entire this climate risk and vulnerability assessment. We just do not want to keep it as just a scientific or a technological exercise, but very important to bring the human element and the experience and the learnings and the knowledge of the communities into our study. Similarly, with the action planning, the processes have many sub-processes, and I do not want to go into the complication of this sub-process, but very important is that the communities have a say in the prioritizing of these activities. What we have seen that the collaborative approaches with the communities is the partnership with communities is very important, as I have mentioned, for the community knowledge and expertise. And also, the participatory decision-making process has helped in the success of our implementation, in the projects that we have implemented. We have seen that active community participations really value adds and also helps in the sustainability of the different infrastructure and other project components we have undertaken. To sort of sum up the results and impact, what we have seen that sustainable access to basic services, it definitely helps to make these vulnerable communities more resilient. Community participation helps the communities to be much more prepared for future climate events. They're more knowledgeable, they are more prepared for those, they have a better understanding. And of course, these actions do result in poverty reduction because when we work on water resource management issues, when we provide access to water supply, we have done several impact studies which have shown that how the overall income and livelihoods of the communities have improved. And of course, the final is the increased public awareness. So to sum it up, the way we look at it is the success is sort of strengthened by three factors. One is community empowerment. That is the key mantra which I've been trying to repeat again and again. The second is the strengthening of local institution. I've been focusing on the community element. But what we also understand is very important not to just parachute in expensive consultants and do the work, but very important to strengthen the local institutions. Because development partners will come and go, external partners will come and go, but the local people are going to stay there. So very important not only to strengthen and have active participation from the communities, not just token participation, but also to strengthen the local institutions, because that will enable sustainability of our endeavors. And finally, very important to look in how we can strengthen the element of vertical integration, because it is very important to bridge the knowledge gap that often exists in a scenario of a developing country between the national level and at the local level. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your kind of presentation. And it is also very, very useful for the case of the Laos community adaptation management case. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Giriraji Amarnath, Research Group Leader, Water Risk to Development and Resilience of International Water Management Institute. So Giriraji, floor is for yours.
Takes extra time to find the slides. I don't see my slides here. Or this one, I don't know. Probably this one. Yeah. Thank you so much, Yumiko-san, and thank you to all the participants and the previous speaker. I hope the slides will coming now. So I'll be speaking on our ongoing experience in CGR climate resilience initiatives on what climate action and water governance is critical to our efforts. The picture that was taken from OECD that talks about the 12 indicators that they comes up with the principles of water governance. Now, the main focus for us is how do we really bring up the elements of water governance. So this is very synaptic approach. There are some text that is not coming. We are developing currently a synergetic approach to linking technology, data, community involvement, and as well as the policy reforms to come up with more sustainable water management, equitable distribution, and the conservation of water resources. So when we speak of governance, one of the core pillars is the data, technology, and capacity development. Unless these instruments are not there, we don't know what the community prioritization. The previous speaker have spoken rightly about information is very critical to find out where the access to water is fundamental. So we have these elements, which I'm not going to go into the detail. And then we bring on the community knowledge, which is very important to know the relevance of stakeholder engagement. That was also pointed out. The vertical governance and as well as the horizontal governance is very critical. And then once these two set of pillars are available, then we can talk about the policy reforms, how the institutions can look, local specific investment, or from the top down, and the bottom up prioritization will come. And there is always a retrospective to correct these reforms. That's where we believe there is a loop to these mechanisms has to be adapted. Then we can also ensure that how these principles can be further evaluated. That is where we came with the CGR Climate Resilience Initiative. We are building in 9 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We will introduce briefly what is that particular program is about. And we are good to create so many acronyms. Every project has an acronym, so you have to come up with this name called CLIMBER, Building Systemic Resilience to Climate Extreme and Variability. That is in short called CLIMBER. And I think most of our prioritization is at 1 degree and 1.5 degree. And there are regions in the Africa and Asia are already going into anomalies in the next 2050 by 4 degree or so. So how does our policies and our local communities and our governance structure should look, not like an accelerative investment, but a more transformative thinking we require. That's where the multi-scale governance is very, very critical here. So I'm not going to go into all the details of the challenges that the community is facing in terms of the episode of growing periods that are reduced, the community is getting more marginalized, but more importantly, the point of coming up with a more transdisciplinary engagement and a multi-systemic thinking is very, very crucial here. So this particular program I'm leading here has got 4 pillars. It looks at improving coordination of a specific large-scale projects that were implemented. I will highlight only that particular component, what we are doing there. What we develop is a multi-scale polycentric tool guide, which brings policymakers of different institutions to work together. We are also working with a platform called Aware. It brings coordination of technical data users, the humanitarian actors. We don't have time. It is more on enabling responsiveness. And then we have a facilitation planning tool that promotes long-term investments and also looking at how the projects are performing and bringing a multi-coordination efforts. And also, like the previous speaker spoken about local level efforts, we are looking at local-led adaptation, what we call is the Champions of Change program. And fundamentally, each of these elements require a social equity framework as well as a sustainable climate financing thinking around that. So in the interest of time, I'll just highlight the component 1 and a last slide on the empowering champions of change. So what we are currently doing in a country like Sri Lanka, we looked at the multi-scale polycentric tool guide by just looking at what are the large projects that the donors have been funding and supporting the government of Sri Lanka. So these are some projects coming from development partners, whether it is World Bank, ADB, or etc. We look at what is the governance issues in many of these development projects. These are 100, 200 million large projects. And what is a missing link between each of these programs? What are the interconnectedness of the sectors, etc.? And we looked at specifically with all the project directors, working with the country development donors there, and why the projects needs synergies and understanding the bigger silo issues. And then we are working on coming up with what we call is a MPG adaptation tool guide, which basically ensures that the government and the practitioners will analyze how much better I can work together in a region. So this is a region in a study area where a lot of interventions are happening around, closer to 300, 400 million US dollar, including the GCF investments there. So when you look at all this project, a project will look at more adaptive options, or what we call is a adaptation option, what we call is a responsive impact. We have a X problem, we have X variability, and how do you mitigate that in a more short-term perspective? Most of the projects looks at 10 to 15 year cycle, that is very important. And then we look at how the polycentric governance, because if a Ministry of Irrigation works on providing canal structure and bringing a water for monocrops, how does the livestock, aquaculture, fisheries, horticulture could work together within that framework to come up with a more incremental impact? That's what we call a combined multi-scale polycentric tool guide and a transformative option. So we bring a lot of governance structure within that from national to local scale. And given this is quite complex to understand, it is even more complex here, where we look at those 4 projects as an adaptation options. We look at set of institutions, how many institutions they are working. Across these 19 sectors we looked at, variables what we are talking about, and role of those planning and its institutions have been evaluated, and their performance of those projects have also been evaluated. And we then look at the transformative characteristics, how much this program need to restructure, what is the path shifting exercise they have to do, and how much innovative they are and how persistent they will be in terms of looking at the overall social welfare of the program, not just as a single project, but more on a transformative thinking. So we then provided these recommendations for interventions in water, environment, and agriculture, etc. So that's a tool guide we are developing that. So this is happening more from national level to consultation process, etc. Then we go into the community level process. So in the community level process, what we do is we just get into the community level details of this project, how they are valuable, what are the challenges of there, how communities even adapt to the climate change impact. So we do that exercise. And then we also work now, bring the partners of both the local and as well as the provincial and national level, and then come up with this kind of a framework, which we are not going to go in detail, but we have tested that in Zambia, Kenya, and Sri Lanka. And this is the framework we are trying to do. So some interferences we need to do at a horizontal governance. That's where we look at the community to district level. And the model we worked in Kenya and Sri Lanka is looking at more a larger involvement of national agencies as well. For example, if someone have to build a nature-based flood mitigation, there is a role of national planning, role of disaster management, irrigation department. Everybody has to play a role at a national to the sub-national level. So we are working on that. There is not a complete results is available, but we will be coming up with the next cycle of reporting of how this MPG tool is fundamentally important. So as you go to the last phase of the community level, always one of the challenges we have seen is we go like more collecting all the data and understanding what the community needs. But then the community do expect a relevant infrastructure process is required. Most of the time, the project does not offer a lot of infrastructure solutions to them. Like one of the requirements that the community said is they want to have like how a local-led adaptation is very important for climate action or water action. Here, we then set up the polycentric governance model and evaluated what are the priorities for women and men. And then we came with this requirement of setting up a borehole, because these communities are having regular recurrent drought, and then there is issues of health issues as well as the access to drinking water, and the overall livestock has to be sold out because there is no water available. So taking this principle, now the farmers in our regions are cultivating for the first time the maize farmers there, and they are now able to access 24/7 drinking water in that region, covering 850 households in this particular location. And the application of this is also relevant for in places like we are working with Niti Aayog again in India, where they come up with a composite water management index. So if you look at the 9th segment is about policy and governance, and all the above parametrics are more on the biophysical, access to water, etc. Why I'm showing this one is very important to see how the states are also performing in terms of water management solutions going forward by using a similar framework what we want to do. My last slide of highlighting here is we have to make sure while governance is very critical, we cannot also ignore the relevance of gender and youth here. We look at both the institutional innovation as well as the technical innovation. This is the case study we are working in Nepal. When you have quite a good, strong institutional innovation, you may not have a technical innovation, providing infrastructure solutions. So we need to have a trade-off between both the institutional and the social innovation. Then only we can look at the social welfare of those communities going forward on this. So thank you again for giving this opportunity.
So thank you so much for Giriraji for introducing how all your tool index are actually applying on the ground in Sri Lanka and some African country and so on. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Thomas Panera, actually Director for Natural Capital and Agriculture, Food, Nature, Rural Sector Group, new division name. So Tom, floor is for yours. And,
I don't know what to do here. This is so much. I don't even see the mouse.
so technical stuff again. Sorry.
Sorry. Can't even get this to close.
Is this your presentation?
No, this is the previous one.
Okay.
It's stuck.
No, it's the arrow is on the screen. That one.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I sent a hard copy. Yeah, good to go. Is this loading? Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Yumiko, and it's a pleasure to be here.
on behalf of Asian Development Bank. I want to talk about improved planning for water governance and adaptation in East Asia. At ADB, we develop projects, but actually, before we get to the project level, I think it's very important that we work with our clients to raise their capacity, awareness, and ability themselves to start valuing and helping us demand for projects that have climate adaptation and water. So they're part of the process, and it also just makes it much easier for us rather than telling them they have to include these climate elements, but for them to really demand it. So for our upstream engagement, we do a couple of things. Risk analytics, we have a country planning program that we look at projects and see how we can involve climate. We look for concessional finance, either from ourselves or GCF or others for climate. And we support enabling metrics, standards, et cetera. So this comes through our own processes, but then we also support the countries themselves, and I think this is a more important role, to develop their own capacity. And in this case, for planning, we'll look at the PRC and Mongolia. So in 2022, the government of PRC issued its National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy for 2035. This was prepared by Ministry of Ecology and Environment, but released jointly by 17 ministries under the realization that they all had to work together to achieve this. And it's a very comprehensive document, and it looks at different things, but natural ecosystems is where it starts, and water resources is a large focus, along with terrestrial, marine. But then it also looks at social and economic linkages on how the effects from climate change will ripple through the economy and society. And then also it prioritizes climate change monitoring. And it also has a regional focus, and we'll talk about this shortly, on different areas, and the Yellow River is one area where it focused on as a climate hotspot, and is promoting intensive and more efficient use of water, ecological restoration, and early warning. Now, building from this technical assistance we have another one that we're just starting with the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And the idea is to work with provincial and municipal governments to take this broader, larger national strategy, and then how do we downscale it for use at the local level, being provincial, municipal, since all the provinces need to have their own adaptation plans, and cities, and so on and so forth. So this is ongoing right now, and some of the outputs are to develop provincial planning processes based on the national policy, and looking at guidelines for doing this, as well as risk assessment, improving the institutional arrangements at local level, and working on how we can do this. As I think we all know that climate change is cross-cutting, and trying to get just the right people around the table itself can be a challenge to address this. And as I know, said, developing guidelines on climate change adaptation, and we're trying to focus on natural resource sectors for food and security areas, and then enhancing capacity, skills, knowledge. Now, in terms of the Yellow River, we have a very large program there for ADB, and this is both combined technical assistance with 13 sub-projects, but we also, along with the government, have an investment program of about $2 billion over the next 5 years. And we're focusing on natural resource management, efficient, sustainable agriculture, urban-rural green development, and climate change. And again, the important thing is we're taking a landscape approach, working across sectors and across provinces, but trying to do this at basin scale. And if just a few words for context on the Yellow River, it's 2% of the PRC's water, incredibly water scarce, but 26% of the GDP and an important food basket. But you're also looking at a significant runoff reduction due to climate and greater intensity of extreme events. So the challenges vary where you are in the basin, and even if you're taking a basin approach, you need to be quite bespoke in where your interventions are and what they are and what the problems will be. And also, again, governance is a huge issue here. You're working with 9 subnational governments and trying to bring them together to do an adaptation plan. And water is central to it, but other land uses and elements are part of the plan. So in taking this approach, we're kind of breaking it down and coming up with what are the challenges, and then how can we put together a strategy to support the government moving forward. And you can see here that upper reaches, you're going to have the most, Tibetan Plateau, you're going to have warming the most significant, so you have runoff, and it's also the least developed, so ecology will be affected significantly by biodiversity, and then you have corresponding adaptation measures for ecological protection, water storage, etc. Middle reaches, high temperature, as we've been seeing, huge heat waves across the globe. China has been severely affected by these. And so you're going to have ecology again affected, agriculture, it's a very large agriculture, even it's a big transport area, and also you have tremendous soil issues. It's the Yellow River due to the lowest plateau, due to all the sediment. And then downstream, even though you still have reduced runoff, you're going to still have flooding. So focusing on infrastructure, agriculture, improved monitoring. I mean, I think if people saw 2 years ago, they had the massive flood in Zhengzhou with 400 people killed, $10 billion in damage, and the flooding and the PRC and the drought has just been off the charts over the last 3 years, as well as it has been globally. So that's just kind of how we're trying to work with the government there. And quickly go through here. We have another technical assistance in Mongolia, very different government to work with in terms of capacity, but we're supporting them to focus on 3 IMAGs or provinces or states for adaptation planning to support resilient policy transformation. And so we're working with the National Center for Climate Change that's just been recently established, developing guidelines again. And an important part here is the focus on civil society organizations and youth. And we saw in the previous presentations how they need to be brought into the process. And in Mongolia, they play quite a meaningful role. And starting with climate risk assessments for water, and that's what you can see in the map here. We're looking at low, medium, high risk. So let me just move quickly here. So some of the final steps to inform the adaptation planning is we're doing the climate risk assessment in the 3 provinces, working with the national agency on proposed adaptation measures in the 3 provincial capitals, looking for local measures to be integrated into the local planning process. So again, taking national to subnational, and also coming up with pilot projects. And certainly capacity building is a big part of this. So the lessons are finance and governance are critical to go together to deal with adaptation in water. Lack of an enabling environment for private sector is, again, a theme we've been hearing, but especially true for investment in water and adaptation. We need to look at future aspects and advanced warning, focus on knowledge for all our clients, both upstream and downstream. Look at innovation where appropriate, and it depends, it's context and client specific. And then working with local stakeholders, as we've been hearing throughout this session, civil society, youth, to get a sense of ownership, transparency, and responsibility. Thank you very much.
Tom, thank you so much for introducing the case of East Asia, particularly from China and Mongolia, and also the way of no Beijing river Beijing management case is also very, very helpful to identify what you are doing in terms of upper, middle, and downscale. Next, I also would like to Mr. Konami, sorry. Mr. Takahiro Konami, Director of International Affairs Office, Water and Disaster Management Bureau of Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, Tourism, Japan. Yes, Konami-san.
To deal with it. これエンドしていいんですよね。Okay, coming. Hello, good afternoon, late afternoon. I'm Takahiro Konami from the government of Japan, and I'd like to introduce the Japanese innovation, not a technical innovation, but a legislative innovation in the flood management, and the important background of the innovation, which is history or community. Let's move. No, okay. First, I'd like to review one phrase from my. Actually, I have not attended this meeting, but I found it from internet. So the innovation isn't always about creating new things. Innovation sometimes looking back is required for innovation. So why? First, I'd like to start from history of Japanese flood management. This is innovation. Achieved in 16th century. Probably there is a lot of innovation in historical era in many countries. Of course, in China or Sri Lanka, as I said today. So many countries have a lot of history. So this is a uncontinued levy to save flood water power, physical energy of the flood water to reduce the damage of the flood. Next one is, I don't know the most oldest one, that at least from the Middle Ages. This is evacuation support in the villages or communities. Yeah. The third one is a community-based surrounding levy, also from the Middle Ages. Such a lot of old innovation has been forgotten, actually, in the modern history in Japan. So, you may know, so climate change impacts a lot to Japan as well through the increasing rainwater and increasing thermal sea surface temperature. So what is happening in Japan? The flood damage, mean economic damage, become larger. You can see the most. The largest economic damage is seen in 2019 compared to decades ago. So then, Japan has decided to change the flood management planning facing to climate change. So you can see they're very easy to understand. So very easy to increase a goal of expected flood level to for example, increasing rainfall by 10%, and its result increasing river flow by 20%. And in case flood frequency will be doubled. So it requires, obviously, innovation to the flood management policy. So then, flood management policy has been changed in a few years ago. This is a result of the innovation. So I wouldn't like to explain the very detailed of this innovative approach, but it was divided to three approaches. The first is kind of the conventional flood management approach of flood protection, the first pillar. The second one is exposure reduction to the guide residents to the lower risk areas using controlling land use management or so, and promote safer ways of living. For example, to make an elevated house or so, such kind. And the third one is a disaster resilience to make evacuation possible using early warning and daily drills or such kind of. Yeah. And these policies will be implemented comprehensively in the basin-wide approach based on the basin-wide community. Basin-wide is kind of the round table, including the communities and many ministries and government, central government and local government. And all of this approach was legislated. This is an innovation of Japanese government recently achieved to tackle with climate change. But you already know some of them, or probably many of them, was already achieved in some aspect in historical background. So, for example, we introduced a new innovation of no here, of constructing a levee without a continuous levee to dispersed levee to protect the villages. But it's a very new from comparative from the modern era, but it was also the copy of the historical innovation. This is also one. This is a community-based levee, which is surrounding the village or buildings. And you know it is from the based on the history of the continuous from the Middle Ages in Japan. So I wouldn't like to explain the detail of that, but again, so we need innovation to compare to tackle with climate change. It's obvious. It's a very important background. But to make innovation, firstly, we should make a review of the history of the local community, local regional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, to make actual innovation and make to implement it with a proper legislation or policy approach. That's what I'd like to make an input. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for Konami-san for making very strong message about the importance of innovation based on historical practice. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Yoon Nam Kun, Vice President of Korea Water Forum. technical stuff. Sorry for help. I can't find the note.
Which one is yours? Seven.
No, this one. This one.
Put it up there.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about Korea's integrating approaches to managing a water and climate change. And before I start, I would like to give a big thanks to Yumiko for a great coordination of this session. Thank you. When I say integrating approaches, we are talking about not just adaptation to climate change, but also a mitigation also there. When I attend these global meetings, a lot of people ask me about where I came from, and north or south. But Korea is right there, and Philippines is another place, and Sweden is another place. And between Korea and Japan, no, I'm sorry, for Korea, north side is 26 million people, south side is 52 million people, where good people live. And I came from south. Like many countries, we do have a same problem with a water-related disasters and flood and drought and abnormal heat waves and heavy snow and typhoons and even with algal blooms. We do have same problems as most countries have. Before I go to the adapting side, I want to talk about a mitigation side. In Korea, we put our efforts in two areas. Number one is increasing the energy efficiency in all water-related systems. And number one is a water distribution system. We want to have NRW, non-revenue water reduction, by controlling the leakage and metering errors. I think you have all the same programs in your country too. And our target is NRW is 15%, below 15%. It's very much aggressive target goals, and we are getting there. And we are putting a lot of investment in this NRW reduction program. Number two is promoting a water saving. We put a lot of water awareness program and to save the water and minimize a water consumption all over the countries. And we start this water saving program in early age of children and in primary school. And the other one is we are using a lot of alternative water resources, and such as a wastewater reuse and desalination, etc. Okay, this is the measures we are using for energy efficiency program. The other one is production of a renewable energy and recovery. And in most of our drinking water plants, drinking water treatment plants and sewage treatment plants, we're trying to aid those sites as RE100, Renewable Energy 100 program. What that means is when you treat a drinking water or a wastewater, and you use a lot of energy to treat those water and wastewater, and on site, at least we want to make it self-sufficient by using solar energies and other renewable energies. The other one is we are using floating a photovoltaic energy production in the dams to produce electricities. And we have those largest one in the world in Korea. The other one is we are using utilization of air-water temperature difference and for the energy production. For example, we are using the dam water in the summer to cooling the data center. In the winter time, we are using the temperature difference through a heating and other facilities too. So this is the one we have a specific examples for the mitigating and climate change in water. The next one is adapting to climate change in water sectors. We do have two big measures. Number one is develop a climate-proof water infrastructure. And we're trying to level up the design flood frequency for levees, dams, and storage. For example, for levees or dams, in the past, we are using 100-year flood design frequency. We are now level up from this year, from 100 years to 200 years, to prevent the damages of water flooding and to our urban areas and natures. The other one is control of urban flooding. In Seoul, for example, the capital of Korea, the last year we had huge damages in center of the Seoul with flooding. And we're trying to develop and construct deep rainwater storage system and a tunnel system in Seoul. And with that, and I think we can reduce the flooding damages in urban areas. To summarize what I have discussed to you, we have three major programs for this climate change and water area. Number one and number two are the transformations. Number one is the digital transformation. We're trying to digitalize all the water production and water treatment system, and with the IoT, big data, and artificial intelligence, and cloud, and etc. For example, we do have AI-operated drinking water treatment system in Korea. Number two is we are trying to have a green transformation, and by using more renewable energy to manage and to produce water and treat the wastewater. That's green transformation. Number three, so 1, 2 is a transformation by digital and by green. Number three is a urban flood control system, and we're trying to have that in big cities like Seoul in next couple of years. That's all I have for you, and it's more specific examples of what we are doing in Korea. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Dr. Yoon Nam-kun for introducing what Korea is doing, particularly in terms of technical aspects. So next, I would like to invite the online speaker, Dr. Mary Galvin, Research Coordinator of Water Integrity Network. So, Mary, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So please start your presentation.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'll be speaking about integrity in governance and climate change adaptation. Okay, great. So in terms of talking about integrity and climate change adaptation, I first wanted to explain that I'm coming from the Water Integrity Network, which is a nonprofit organization encouraging integrity in water and sanitation. We work with a number of partners in countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. We don't chase the corruption cases. We do preventative work to suggest broad approaches or specific interventions for different situations. I also wanted to add that while I myself have done extensive work in the area of community-based climate change adaptation in water, I'm not an expert on Bangladesh, but my colleague Rushika Satish is online, so also in the chats, if you have questions, I'm sure she will help to answer those. So I wanted to focus on how to build integrity into early stages of climate adaptation, in particular into large-scale water projects. Starting with the point that countries in Bangladesh, like Bangladesh, are highly vulnerable to climate change impacts. We've heard a lot of that from other speakers, and the country's socioeconomic profile exacerbates that level of vulnerability. So we're hoping that there will be a great influx of funding. The Bangladesh adaptation plan needs about $230 billion between 2023 and 2050. And there's an awareness that when those funds are forthcoming, that there'll be a need to create mechanisms to contain or to minimize risk, because integrity breaches mean that funding isn't spent as it's needed. It's actually the corruption undermines successful projects. So this pilot is about establishing a framework for, like I said, large scale water projects in the case where finance is high and that the impact is concentrated. In terms of the framework, it was when in the Infrastructure Transparency Initiative with the Inter-American Development Bank that developed the framework. It's been piloted in 10 Latin American countries. So it's just a start, but using data points in 10 projects. The focus was on planning and preparation as stages in infrastructure development where there are insufficient tools, research, and risk mapping. So the aim was to flag unusual patterns that take place in those early phases that could be, and that those flags could be adjusted specifically for climate change. It's important to note that flags don't mean that corruption is present, but it supports stakeholders to ask the right questions. So that helps in policy development and investment allocation decisions. So here are the integrity risk categories. I won't read them out, but just to say that in terms of decision-making, undue influence and non-accountable decision-making is a flag, is an integrity risk, as is unmanaged conflict of interest or biased preparation. And then we're familiar with more with priority misalignment, which is also an integrity risk, and misuse of public funds. So applying those risk categories to projects and gathering the data is what allows these areas to be flagged for further investigation. So now turning to Bangladesh, we did an integrity assessment with local partners that had a range of findings, but the very straightforward part was that there already are in place quite strong laws, policies, budget projections, government structures that will help with extreme responses to extreme weather events. But the monitoring, evaluation, and disclosure of their execution, including in the kinds of projects I'm talking about, are partial or weak. And then the last point, and that's where the entry of this framework comes. The last point about corrective measures, incentive, and sanctions being absent, I've noted there, but it's not a particular focus of this part of the project. So a lot of the presentations, I have the advantage, I've heard those, a lot of the presentations have focused on the importance of community engagement, which is central. And this too is focused on civil society taking up these lessons, but it's also government as well. WIN's partners and members, we talk about TAPA, transparency, accountability, participation, and our network partners through BAWIN, Bangladesh WIN, and other partners are looking at how we might use the lessons from this framework in their TAPA work. So I'm just going to run through what that looks like in transparency, accountability, and participation, how the framework plays out. So in terms of transparency, the first step is just having access to this information that is used to identify the data points for the framework. Just having access to that data is already helping with planning and decision-making being transparent. Then, more particularly, finding out more about the location of the large-scale assets that would be built, like water treatment plants, helps in identifying potential unintended consequences by having the different civil society stakeholders, community groups involved, and also seeing the equity trade-offs that might be present. The third thing in transparency is encouraging the breakdown of budgets so you can see the potentially biased decisions. It's much more evident when the budgets are already broken down. In terms of accountability, again, having this data adds clarification and a level of objectivity, a focus on the feasibility studies, having gender and inclusion components and being conducted fully, not just as a side exercise. And then vetting systems to check unregulated lobbying and influencing prior to the tender stage. So even if those vetting systems are in place, theoretically, actually making sure they're working for that purpose. And then finally, participation. And again, this is probably the most crucial, or one of the most crucial elements that is so difficult. In the present global climate, leaders in government, as we know, are feeling huge pressure, and it makes feeds into a certain sensitivity that makes it difficult to create space for open engagement. But without that open engagement, much of the work we're talking about in this session, we know will be undermined. So under participation, engaging government through established mechanisms and a broad consultation process at the planning stage. It needs to be from the get-go, not trying to respond once poor decisions have been made or decisions without integrity. So overall, we know that the funding is essential, but that it poses integrity challenges, and particularly in vulnerable contexts, that we also know that the community-based small-scale adaptation is critical, but then also the large infrastructure projects are needed for a strategic impact. They have benefit, in which time you need the large ones and where you need the community-based ones is an ongoing exploration that we're all learning from. But to minimize the risk of corruption and pay attention to equity, we need to embed TAPA into infrastructure development, particularly with planning and preparation, which is what I've been speaking about. So integrity champions within government agencies, IFIs, water and sanitation stakeholders, those in industry, agriculture, people here, can use this framework and take specific steps to strengthen climate adaptation that's essential for Bangladesh's future. And policymakers need to listen. Thank you.
much for Mary for introducing the importance of for attention for the integrity aspect, transparency, and accountability for infrastructure development to address climate change adaptation as well in case of developing countries in Asian Pacific. So now, although time is very, very limited, we would like to have a brief, panel discussion with all speakers here, Mary, and also audience between on-site and online. Now, I'd like to kindly invite our APWF Vice Governing Council Chair, Ms. Chanfa Wu. Chanfa, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
So, all speakers, please come
thank you.
on screen.
Yeah.
On screen.
Can I ask Yumiko
Yes.
san, can I ask you, how much time do we have? Do we have 5 minutes or 4 minutes?
We can have 10 minutes.
Have 10 minutes. So thank you so much. Okay, sure. Okay, thank you, Yumiko-san, and thank you all the speakers for sharing your very insightful and knowledgeable experience, and also your work, but focus there as well. I think I've learned a lot. I hope you all as well. So I would like to maybe first through the first round of questions among yourselves. There are a lot of interesting overlapping in terms of the work, focus of your work, as well as actually your efforts moving forward. So my first question to you, maybe to each of the speaker to get the conversation going is that, as this session is designed, we are part of preparatory process for the 10th World Water Forum. So this is a part of the effort we are moving forward to contribute actually to bring the regional perspective to Bali next May. So I would like to hear each of you if there's one specific proposal that you feel like you would like to bring forward for our regional, collectively to bring to Bali. What would that be? Particular, of course, focused around adaptation and water governance. I do not have a particular order. Yumiko may be on site. You can ask each of the speaker to share his or her thoughts. This one proposal, what would that be? Thank you. Yeah, Regina, I saw Regina. Okay. You were the first one, so I see you. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I would like to propose that we think, as I pretty clearly said in my presentation, that we think a bit creatively and innovatively about who is the enabling environment and leveraging other actors and networks to expand the reach.
Okay, can I just ask a little bit of follow-up question on that? So based on what you have heard from your fellow panelists, anything additional that you would like to take away and sort of integrate in your focus of work next?
That's a big question. Look, I mean, we understand the importance of working with government. It's clear from all of the other presentations that that's a really critical component. It was great to hear lots of reference to building capacity of government to be able to engage with communities. That's something we have an interest in and would be keen to learn more about that.
Okay, thank you. So next, Dr. Namkong, what's your proposal, your big idea that you would like to bring to Bali next May? Thank you.
Sure. As I presented in my presentation, and I suggest we have an integrated approach for both, not only just adaptation, also a mitigation in the program. Because when we see, when we talk about the adaptation side, that is just part of a water and the climate change, a crisis. And the mitigation side is very, very important, and we have a lot of things to do, including a leakage control and etc. So my suggestion is integrated approach to a climate change.
Okay, a follow-up question on that. So listening through the presentations today, one idea that has emerged, particularly now I'm in Beijing, from China perspective, ideally each and every nation in our region could have a national climate adaptation resilient strategy. like what China has done, like Tom presented as well, this 2035 strategy. Do you think a vehicle, a tool like that would really help address the issues you're very concerned with in terms of really getting the integrated sort of solution and moving forward? Thank you.
I believe so, and then sharing all the knowledge and experience and what they have done will be very, very important, and for countries who are not yet ready.
Okay, thank you. Now, Tom, nice to see you again. So it's very interesting to hear, your presentation of the work particularly in East Asia. I think in particular, as we can tell, relatively speaking, in our Asia Pacific region, some Eastern Asian countries have definitely been gearing forward in terms of leading the efforts in terms of climate adaptation. The first question to you will be, do you think each and every nation should, like China and some other countries in our region, to really have formally put forward a national, well-developed actually national adaptation, climate adaptation and resilience strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Cheng-Wan. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. Well, I think it's context specific, and I mean, every country is required to have a NAP and other documents that articulate what their adaptation strategies should be. Now, whether they want an independent strategy of their own and at what level of government they would want that is context specific. I think the bottom line is that adequate planning, capacity building for adaptation in the water sector and then how it translates through the economy and society is incredibly important. And it's context specific, but I think this focus on planning is critically important and capacity. And I'd like to just reiterate Dr. Nam's point that I think Bali should be a chance for us to start something to share knowledge between the participants and the different countries in the region, either through government or other networks, but we really need to focus on this knowledge sharing and experience and lessons. Thanks.
Sure. Now my second question, and from ADB perspective, what will be if there's the most important idea, proposal you would like to bring to Bali, what would that be?
From ADB is how can we help you? We have lots of resources, financial, technical knowledge, and we want to engage and provide all the resources that we have to help countries become more resilient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the water sector.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Abby, from UN Habitat perspective, thank you for sharing the case you're working, in Laos and particularly around the settlement. As your work in the Laos has sort of shown, there's still a lot of a gap in terms of settlements and particularly taking into settlement or resettlement actually of people, particularly from climate resilience perspective. So what will be one idea that you would like to bring to Bali next year, particularly around the work you're doing now?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Cheng-Wan. So not only the UN Habitat case study which I presented, but also I saw that so many interesting ideas and case studies were presented by different organizations, and there's a wealth of information, and I think we can all benefit from the cross-pollination. So one idea would be to sort of find or establish a platform where these ideas could be sort of exchanged and we can sort of benefit from each other's expertise. Thank you.
Okay, I have a follow-up question there. Now we are literally living in crisis. All the climate induced natural disasters here, we're living through hell. And in that process, I think one idea that has emerged, basically showing where we settle our people, where we live so far in terms of urban areas, particularly urban areas, actually also in rural areas there, we have not been able to have the sort of resilience to resist or fight the climate change at all. And so that meaning migration probably will be somehow, willingly, not willingly, seems to be going to be something actually that's going to happen at a very large scale. What's your view from UN Habitat perspective? How do we address that?
Sorry, there was some background noise. So are you asking about how we can scale up these initiatives?
No, I'm talking about the crisis, how to move forward in terms of climate impacted this migration, potentially large-scale migration from a settlement perspective.
Yeah, this is one very important issue, and so sometimes we do work together with other institutions like IOM, the International Office of Migration. So sometimes we partner with them. But our aim is more from UN Habitat side is how we can make the existing settlements more resilient. And I think if we focus on how making those settlements resilient, then I think we sort of diminish the possibility of people migrating, because I think that's the last option that people have to fall back on. So the focus is that how can we make them resilient? And as we have seen from our experience that it is indeed possible. And so the focus should be how we can make the existing settlements resilient and sort of dwarf this migration thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Gerard Roch, did I get your name correct? Sorry if I didn't. I'm very interested actually in your work, particularly from the dashboard perspective. You didn't really elaborate or share more details about that. Can you elaborate a little bit in terms of dashboard, climate smart governance, and the dashboard? What's in there? What's the function of it, and in terms of within your sort of framework of your work?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think due to the limited time, we didn't go to the importance of this climate smart governance dashboard. Basically, it's a facilitation planning tool that brings coordination across all the ministries and development partners implementing the program. Currently in countries like Zambia, we are working with green economy and environment to infuse all the projects that are available. The purpose is also to look at are these projects are happening in right locations where risk analytics information can tell us how much projects are there in a highly vulnerable regions, and we are tracking those projects in terms of an M&E framework. Then we also bring investment portfolio planning as a dashboard. So the whole purpose is to bring at a national level, how do we bring better coordination, collaboration and cooperation across the agencies to ensure that the adaptation planning, what the countries are aiming to achieve, would have these planning tools will facilitate that process. Thank you.
Okay, second question. So you definitely listened to Mary's presentation. What's your biggest takeaway from Mary's work presentation in terms of integrity? How do you think that would really help you reinforcing each other's work and effort? Thank you.
Yeah, I think for us, I think there was a lot of presentations on community engagement, and we look at more on the cross scale, both the horizontal and vertical coordination of the institution. And having said this, we need to evaluate these frameworks and to ensure that there is a clear demand and buy-in of all the relevant parties in the country level and also at the regional level, so that hopefully in the next sessions we will have certain government representatives having this clarity of how this can be used and how they are able to scale up. At the end of the day, we as an organization work to help all sectors and the partners going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Takahiro, my question to you is that, and of course we need to look into the past, particular from culture, heritage, legacy, knowledge, indigenous knowledge perspective. Things like that are very, very local. And because Asia Pacific is a large, very diverse, culturally diverse region as well. And what would you suggest a more effective way in terms of really getting those sort of indigenous knowledge coming together, the historic experience coming together, so that we'll be able to have a better understanding from Asia Pacific regional perspective, to make sure we really learn from each other, if not really totally embrace learning, really copying from each other, but definitely we can learn from each other. is there some more effective vehicles, instrument to do so? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for good question. So, yes, exactly. So there's a lot of variation or diversity in the cultural history of the. Of course, not only in the Asia Pacific, but in the world, everywhere in the world. So, and it's not so easy to make a unified method to looking back to the history or experience of the past era. So, but now it's possible to share the examples from the very small examples to be shared by such a occasion like World Water Week or some platform. So then we can seek or find similar cases facing the for example some particular community in particular country and another particular community in another country will be maybe similar and so shared the knowledge or experience to be horizontally achieved. So such kind of sharing very local information will be important to make actual innovation in future, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Mary, I feel like you sort of giving you the last word or something like that. So based on what already you've achieved from the integrity-focused work, what are the biggest barriers you are facing these days in order to really get this more further strengthened and enhanced and maybe deployed more broadly, not only at a regional level, but at a global level? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's always the $1 million question, with or without corruption, right? I think that a lot of the points that have been made here about things working at the very local level and needing to take into account the contextual differences is a big challenge. Like what the integrity risks look like in Bangladesh versus what they look like in the United Kingdom. They're both struggling, but those are very different. So for us, I think the focus is how to integrate checks on integrity breaches within systems. So in a sense, this idea of coming to these sorts of forums and having an additional presentation on integrity, we, in my opinion, need to get past that sort of siloed effect, so that I would hope that, for example, in Bali, we would hear much more, each stakeholder reflecting on corruption risks as part of the risk, as part of the climate risk, not as something like, oh, isn't that nice? Let's add on to that separately. So I think, yeah, for me, the challenge is how do we begin to look at these as very specific situations, but within a system that begins to take on these broader challenges.
Okay, thank you very much. Yumiko-san, do you want to bring in maybe only one online question or not? We're running out of time for me to wrap up.
Unfortunately, we cannot find time, so we need to wrap up. So final remarks from Chanfa, please. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. So let me just thank you again for all the session, for all the speakers and the participants. From where I stand, there were a few takeaways that I would wrap up quickly, very generally. Firstly, we do live in a climate crisis era. And as we all know, 95% of the climate challenges is about water. And because the impact on the water cycle, and we all know climate change is not only impacting the hydrosphere, but also lithosphere, atmosphere, biosphere. So that's the reality we are living now. And then that leads to the second, my takeaway point. That's why from the water governance perspective, we are literally making all the efforts possible at every level to connect all the dots. As you all shared today, there's a horizontal, vertical system from time scale, not only present, but also looking back into the future from a vertical perspective, we really, you emphasize the importance of the local indigenous knowledge and the participation, institutional sort of capacity strengthening there as well. So that's where we are today. The third takeaway is that I really want to particularly repeat the message at the local level. We all know climate change, water crisis is a global challenge, but in most of the cases, they are all felt at the local level. That's why more than ever, we need to really emphasize, even re-emphasize the role and the capability of local community in the governance, enhancing governance perspective. The fourth takeaway point is that I think we sort of discussed, I sort of played around with the ideas, some of the big ideas we would like to bring to Bali next May from a regional perspective. For instance, maybe each and every country, even at the regional local level, we do need seriously to have a planning process together. Planning is not just a planning for the sake of planning, but really using that process vehicle to, maybe understand what works, the good things we need to keep. And very importantly, we also need to identify gaps that needs to bridge, hurdles to remove. And of course, in the meantime, how do we make sure mobilize all the resources, communities, participate together to take actions to address that. Last and not least, actually, integrity, accountability is key. So, we made all the commitments and we said this and that, but at the end of the day, whether the money will be put in the right place, delivering the right sort of right level of impacts, we do need to hold the government's business, finance, and everyone actually accountable in this process, under the framework of water governance. So those are some very general big idea takeaways from me. Thank you very much again. I really appreciate all the support and all your endorsements of the collective partnership. And I definitely, on behalf of Asia Pacific Water Forum Governing Council, I look forward to continue to work with you on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanfa. And I also thank you for all audience be here. And although we are time passing from the end time. And I also thank you for all speakers. And thank you so much for online listener for kindly listening to our session by the end. Thank you so much. And sorry for couldn't catch up your question, but we will respond to you later. So please contact us anytime. Thank you so much.